Well, welcome everybody to CMJ Canada House, and our Bible study on the Torah portion and the Haftarah portion. So looking at the weekly cycle of reading of the Jewish people and the associated voices that come from the kings and the prophets, which are sometimes ignored by some groups, but not by us this year. And so we begin by blessing God for all of his mercies. And because we are in a war, we will also pray that his enemies will submit to our soldiers. And so, Father in heaven, we bless your name, for you are in control. You sit on the throne. And we thank you for, in Jerusalem, the blessing of rain. Outside, the gift of life and hope in the Messiah, and your word that continually speaks true to us, to our forefathers, and to those that are going from us now. We pray, Lord, that we pray in this time of war and darkness, of which we do not want to know, but we know it. We pray, Lord, that your enemies, those that fight against your name and against your people and against your land, that they will submit to our soldiers, that evil will be defeated speedily, quickly in our day, and that you'll bring peace. And we do pray this in the name of our risen Messiah, the Prince of Peace, in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So the Torah portion continues. We are the first one we will look at, and its link is Miketz, which is Genesis 41 to 44, 17. And Miketz means at the end of, and it's the end of his imprisonment. This is Joseph. Okay. And interestingly, now, for those of us who have been studying Jewish roots, or the Hebraic perspective, whatever you want to call it, for quite some time, should know by now that beginnings and ends often occur in the same day, same fashion, same method, same word. And of course, this Torah portion ends very interestingly with, or has in it, the ending of Joseph's imprisonment using this same word. Now, Joseph, you know, he's not perfect like anybody, and he got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, and he has a bit of a tattletale against his brothers. So they put him in a pit, right? You know, they don't kill him. They take his cloak and they put blood on it and pretend that he's dead. But what they do is they put him in a bore, a pit. That's what it says in Genesis 37:24, which is the previous parashah. They put him in a pit, a bore. It's the same word for be'er, which is well, right, where you get a water cistern. So it's a deep pit. Interestingly, he's put into prison when he's in Egypt. But when Pharaoh wants to take him out of prison, they don't call it a prison. In Genesis 41:14, this parashah, they took him out of the bore. Right? He went down into a bore by his brothers, and a foreign king took him out of that bore. Okay, so he's brought out by Pharaoh and placed in a place of control by dreams. Okay, and the dream sequence is what's going to connect the Haftarah portion with this section. So Pharaoh gets a dream, and he does not understand his dream. Like many kings in the Bible don't understand their dreams. I'm probably going to guess that when we have dreams, we don't always understand them either. Right? We often have to ask other people, or pray, or even just not ignore them, but sort of dwell on it, perhaps. But very rarely do people understand their own dreams. Okay, even Daniel doesn't understand his own dreams, right? He can interpret other people's dreams, but he needs an angelic angel to help him interpret his own dreams. So be very skeptical when you meet a prophet who can interpret their own prophecies, okay, or dreamers who can interpret their own dreams. Be a little skeptical, because that actually goes against what you find in the Bible. Okay? But usually you get given gifts, but sometimes those gifts come with limitations. Now, why does God do that for us? Probably for our own benefit. Okay. Sometimes you end up, with mystical healers who can't heal themselves, right? Like Paul. I've got a thorn in my flesh. There's something in my own body that I can't cure. I can cure anybody else. I can fight down demons. I can preach up a storm. I can be saved out of shipwrecks. I can face emperors of the world, but I can't fix this. And so there's so we have to sometimes look at limitations in our gifts as actually divine blessings. Not easy to do. Okay. Because we believe that God is in total control, and he is, we sometimes think that total control means he will make everything right now, but it doesn't always work that way. So our hero is put into a board, and he's taken out by this pagan king Pharaoh, unnamed, never sure who he is, and this pagan king has a dream. God speaks to pagan kings. Why would he do such a crazy thing? And yet this is not an unknown occurrence in the Bible. God also deals with other nations. Why? Because as we discover, they're his people too. Right? God so loved the world, not God so loved that tiny bit of Israel and thought everybody else was a load of rubbish, and wondered why he'd made them in the first place. That's not there. Okay? Israel was meant to be a light to the nations, and they still are, for the creation that God has brought into being, and all the people on it, they're all his. So he can speak to other prophets like Bil'am and other people. He even uses other nations to do his will, and you get hints of that in the Torah, where God, through Moses particularly, will say he's used other nations to do X, Y, Z, including wiping out bad guys. So Joseph is the dream interpreter, and he's going to interpret and prepare to save the world. Right? This whole setup is going to be an incredible blessing, that he is going to become a blessing for the known world. I mean, they're not going to give it away for free. Okay. Joseph's going to be incredibly shrewd. He's going to make great deals with all the nations, and they're all going to owe Egypt, and Egypt's going to be incredibly powerful, and which is going to be a nice place for Israel to gestate, so to speak. Right? Notice how important Egypt is at the foundations of Israel. Right? Out of Egypt I call my son, is the prophetic voice. And notice how Egypt has to have a role to play in the future, in a realm of peace, right? The highway will go from Egypt to Assyria. There's something about this cradle of civilization, this nation, this dealing that Egypt has with the people. I mean, after all, Hagar is an Egyptian. Ishmael is an Egyptian. Right? The Israelites and the Egyptians have a very, very close connection. And so if you happen to be an Egyptian Coptic, you will swear black and blue that as soon as Jesus rose from the dead, Mark was off down to go and tell them the good news, okay? That they were one of the first nations as well to be ready to prepare to believe in the Messiah. They did, after all, translate the Bible into Greek, okay, the Septuagint, so they have a strong history attached to the Word of God, to the people of God, to the history of God, and the future. So that's quite powerful. So, lo and behold, okay, Joseph's now going to get married now that he's free, okay, and who's he going to marry? Oddly enough, Potiphar's wife, husband, no, daughter. Let's get that right, okay. So he's managed to not he's warded off the seductions of the wife, and but ends up marrying a lady by the name of Asnat, okay, which is the daughter of Potiphar, and and according to tradition, okay, now there actually is a book. There actually is a Second Temple period book called Joseph and Asnat, which is the story, the love story between Asnat and Yosef, and how they come together and how she converts, which is very interesting because, of course, there's no possible way that she did in the way we understand conversion. They haven't even been given the Torah. So what exactly is she converting to? Right? So remember, all of the wives of the 12 sons of Jacob, they're all foreigners, right? Most of them are Canaanite. One is Egyptian, and that's not a problem, right? They join in their husbands. They join their husbands, so they join their husband's house. That includes his God. That includes his customs, the way he dresses, the way he talks, um, the way he prays. They teach their sons this way. This was the way people did things in the past, okay? Or the way you were supposed to. It doesn't always happen, because we're going to discover that it doesn't happen with our little friend Solomon, okay? He also gets an Egyptian wife, but does him no good. Right? But Joseph is given um, this pleasure, I guess, of embracing a very high-ranking Egyptian lady, and she produces him two children, okay, Ephraim and Manasseh, whom will become very famous later on, as they will become adopted into the tribes of Israel. Jacob's going to call them his sons, right? So they will actually end up, Manasseh in particular, is going to end up with a lot of territory. And Ephraim is going to have something very special. He's going to have the tabernacle, right? The Shiloh is in Ephraim. God is going to live in his territory. So these outsiders are actually the insiders, so to speak, right? Which is really quite nice. And now Joseph's in charge, and of course it means the eventual showdown is going to come. The story is going to eventually wind back where the brothers who had sold Joseph to Ishmaelites, right? Now remember, Ishmaelites, the descendants of Ishmael, are Egyptians, right? Ishmael's mother, Hagar, is an Egyptian. Hagar gives her son, Ishmael, an Egyptian wife. So the Ishmaelites are they're Egyptians. They're very linked to Egypt. That's probably the reason why they were going to Egypt, right? And the Israelites, Isaac and Ishmael, were very close. And so many rabbis up until the 12th and 14th centuries were called Ishmael. Like, it was not a dirty word. Okay, it was not synonymous with Islam. It had nothing to do with that. It has to do with being very close to the people of God. So the brothers come down to Egypt, and you get all the trickery. There's all kinds of interesting things you could take away from the text, where it goes into great detail, the tricks that Joseph plays back on his brothers. Okay, and it says 10 times that the brothers say to Joseph, "Our father, your servant." Okay, now, Jewish people read the Bible with a fine-tooth comb. Okay, it's the holy text. You've had several thousand years to look at it. Okay? Now, so 10 times that Joseph hears the phrase, "Your father, our father," which is his father, "is your servant," and he doesn't say that's not true, right? So he lives for 110 years. That's how long Joseph is alive until. So what's the logical conclusion? How long should he have lived for? 120, Why did he not live 120? Because 10 times he told a lie. He did not honor his parents. Isn't that a funny way that they look at this? Okay. What's one of the commandments? Thou shalt honor your parents. Your parents are not your servants. Right? Okay. I mean, often as parents, we do everything for our kids. Do we not? Yes. So we are. Okay. We are kind of this. So we'll pay their college fees. We'll drive them to hockey games. Okay. We'll bail them out of their car accidents. Okay. You name it. Okay. We're there. All right. But at the end of the day, the honor actually has to come back from our children to us. Okay. Um, I mean, we're very proud of our kids too, right? For myself, I was in the Ministry of the Interior earlier this week, dropping off a piece of paper for Micah's citizenship application, and and as I was dropping off, I had drop off one piece of paper, so obviously lots of standing in line until finally you can hand in this piece of paper. It was from the army that says that he's a combat soldier and has the legal right for citizenship. And I was talking to the receptionists as we were doing their paperwork, and I said, "Isn't it interesting that when he was a little boy, I was his hero, and right now, he's my hero." And they said, "Oh, these young men, they're all our heroes, right?" But at the end of the day, children are supposed to honor their parents. So the one takeaway from the rabbis is, well, Joseph could have got to 120, but he should have revealed himself earlier. He doesn't. He plays a trick. Okay, and along the way, though, you discover some of the characteristics of the family. And the hero that shows up is Judah, right? Judah becomes the spokesperson. Yet he's number 4. He should not be the spokesperson. Reuven should be the spokesperson, but he is not. He's already abrogated his responsibility as the firstborn. Levi and Simeon have totally blown it by killing everyone. Okay, this is the family at Shechem. They should not have done that. And so Judah is the the guy who's he's the one that comes to the fore and actually begins to engage with Joseph. Okay, and the discussion that they have about Judah will play up more in the next Torah portion. So let's actually just leap to the prophet, or actually the sacred history. The sacred history is First Kings, okay, chapter 3, from verses 15 to 4 verse 1. It's King Solomon and his first wise ruling, because he's had a dream. What's his dream sequence? His dream sequence was actually at the beginning of the chapter, the bits that's not in the Haftarah. But remember that in Jewish tradition, you always are supposed to know the context. You're just supposed to know what goes before and what comes after. Any text is never taken out of context. So what's the actual connection here? It's dreams. Solomon has had a dream, and he's had this is where he requests from the Lord something. I mean, the Lord tells him, "Well, hey, what do you want? I mean, you name it, I'll give it to you, because you are," what is he? He's the Ben David, the son of David. Right? Often when we think of son of David is the Messiah. Well, that's true, but Solomon is also literally the son of David. He's in the line of the Messiah. So he already carries messianic connotations himself. He's also the first king or ruler of Israel who's not a shepherd. And he's also not a killer. Right? All the other leaders of Israel, except for Isaac, are killers. They fight in battles. They kill people. And and uh, especially David. But go through all the judges and etc. Things like that, and even Samuel's doing killing. Saul, Solomon, well, mama's boy, right? Okay, he lives in the palace. He's not a shepherd, and so he's actually not called one of the holy ushpazim that you wait for when you build a sukkah. Right? At the Feast of Tabernacles, when you build a sukkah and you're inviting people to come and eat under your sukkah, there's the expectation that perhaps one of them are the holy shepherds of Israel. And it could be Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, you name the pick. But it goes all the way out to King David and stops because Solomon's not a shepherd. And it plays out, unfortunately, eventually in his life, where we realize he's wise, but at the same time, unbelievably foolish. So he has a dream sequence, but in chapter 3, he's already taken an Egyptian wife. Okay. So now, not that that's inherently a bad thing, because Joseph took an Egyptian wife. Okay. But in Asnat's case, she embraces the family and household of Joseph, produces 2 beautiful kids who become incredibly well trained and taught, and eventually one of them holds the tabernacle for 369 years. Now, and probably is also going to answer the question in the prophetic portion for tonight's study, the 2 sticks, one of Judah, one of Ephraim. Out of all the tribes, why that one? Probably because those 2 tribes had the physical presence of God in them. Right? So but this lady that Solomon marries, she leads him astray, and among many. But Solomon, in his dream, asks for wisdom. In fact, what he asks for is a lev shomea, a heart that hears. What's true wisdom? True wisdom is a heart that is hearing the voice of the Lord. And initially, we see that happens. Although, let's get ready for some of the other comments that our dear brothers and sisters in the rabbinical world give us. So, in verse 14, which is not part of our Torah portion, our Haftarah portion, God says, all right, this is fantastic. If you walk in obedience to me and keep my commands, you will live a long life, right? Obedience is going to give you a blessing. And of course, this is a tension in that in the Hebrew Bible, being obedient gives you a blessing. And disobedience brings a punishment, etc., etc. Once you get into real life, you discover that that's not always the case. You can be a very good person and still have just everything goes against you. And that's the reason why in the Second Temple period, the books that are not in our Bible, which we call Apocrypha, Pseudepigrapha, and all the other texts, they deal with this, right? They're dealing with understanding the nature of suffering, understanding the presence of angels that can come and help you, but your life can still be a mess. All these kinds of things, which will then appear in the New Testament, where suffering produces perseverance, character, and hope, and seeing angels and signs and wonders still doesn't save anybody, right? Have you noticed that? Jesus does a whole bunch of signs, and no one seems to get saved. Okay, just because you do a miracle or see a miracle doesn't actually save you. It's helpful and it happens, but it's not the thing that proves your faith. In fact, usually faith is better if you haven't seen things, right? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet they still believe. Right? Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't see miracles. You should, but don't pin your faith on them, because many unbelievers do not. So in the dream sequence, Solomon has asked for a heart that hears. He has the understanding that, or the command of God, if you obey, you will live a long life and it's going to be wonderful, plus all the other stuff that's going to happen to you. Money, wealth, power, anything, which he's a king anyway, so he's not like he's going to go hungry. And his first encounter, now let's remember, this guy is young. He takes up rulership at a young age. And his first encounter, as according to the text, is a dispute between two prostitutes. Right? You're like, oh my gosh, how did this matter come before the king? Right? So automatically, rabbinical red flags are going, what? Why would Solomon have to address this rubbish? Okay. Two brazen hussies having a problem with their kid, illegitimate kids, mate. But anyway, what does Solomon do? We know the story. Okay. Get the sword out, chop the baby in half, divide the baby, that's nice and fair. And then the real mother, in her love for her child, would much rather see her child thrive and survive under somebody else. And Solomon wisely says, okay, give the child to the rightful person. And the nation hears, and they know they've got a wise king, and it's all going to be fantastic. Except that it doesn't quite go that way, right? He taxes them and has lots of wives and leads people into idolatry. But what really is the story of cutting up a baby in two? Right? That's the rabbinical question. That's where Jewish exegesis goes. So, out of all the issues that our wise king, who's ruling the people of God, needs to deal with, is a bunch of harlots. What's really going on? And they see this as quite prophetic. What's going to happen to Solomon's kingdom? It's going to get cut up into two because he has not obeyed the Lord. And his heart that hears has chosen not to hear. And so they see this as actually quite prophetic. They go, so why is this story the first thing he needs to encounter? Because it's actually a story of, give the portion to the person who's really going to believe. And in the story, get a whole baby given to the right mother, and it's all really fantastic. At the end of Solomon's reign, okay, you get 10 tribes given to some moron, okay, who leads the 10 tribes into idolatry, and you think, why has he got the right to be king? And the two legitimate tribes under the rulership of the legitimate king, who happens to be an idiot, sort of Benjamin and Judah and Simeon. Remember, Simeon is actually in Judah, right? Simeon, his territory is around Beersheba. He literally gets swallowed up by Judah. He disappears. Okay, but he's there. But so the sort of myth of the 10 lost tribes really should probably, they migrate south. They're all mixed. Solomon actually deposits rulers in each of the tribes for taxation purposes, and he doesn't do it based on tribes. He does it based on population centers, because he's smart. Right? So the story of Solomon, unfortunately, is one where he has wisdom. This is true. He has gifts. This is true. He has dreams. This is true. Speaks to God. This is true. But it doesn't seem in the end to profit him as much as we think it probably should. And that should be a lesson for everyone. Right? That should be a warning and a lesson for everyone, that in their wisdom they can become foolish. And so while he has the blessing and the privilege of being able to create the Temple of Solomon, the first temple, he only ends up being able to author 2 Psalms, and there are no prayers are attributed to Solomon in the Jewish prayer book. Okay, they write him out. They say, look, he led Israel into idolatry. We cannot use his prayers. He has wisdom, yes. He's got the Proverbs, he's got Ecclesiastes, he's got, you know, the beautiful poem, Song of Songs. But his end is a tale that you need to study as something not to do. So that brings us into the next Torah portion, Vayigash, which is and he approached, and that word Vayigash, actually that's what I used when I said I'm here to apply for citizenship for my son who's a soldier. Okay, you say, you know, Ani Yagash. I'm here. I am approaching you. I'm coming, drawing close to you to do something special, and that's what Judah is going to do to Yosef. Okay, very special word. The interesting thing about the way that it starts is it'll say Vayigash Yehuda Elav. So Elav is in Hebrew you call it a milat yachas. It's a word that is attached to a verb and that you have to use for motion. So the El tells you who you're pointing to. So literally, it should have just said El Yosef. But the Hebrew says Alav. It approached him. So this leads rabbinical commentators to say, well, two things are going on here. One, Yehuda doesn't know who he's walking up to, right? Like he doesn't know this is his brother. He has no clue. So the Hebrew is reflecting a very literal sense there. But they're also looking at the word El. Now, what does El mean in Hebrew? God. And so they're saying, which part of Joseph is Judah wanting to approach? The God bit. Now, does that mean they're saying that Joseph's God? No, no, no. Okay? But they believe that God is present in amongst this thing. So much so that Joseph's man and God blend together. Right? This sort of idea that you can get from people that say Judaism never ever thought that man and God become one. That's never the case. That's actually not true. It appears all over the place. Okay? It's just not in Jesus. Okay, it's just a polemic to say that not him, everybody else, but just not that guy. Okay, and that's really bad polemic. Okay, well, one of my favorites, of course, is in Deuteronomy, where it actually says Moses, the man of God. That's our English translation, but in Hebrew it just says Moshe Ish Elohim, Moses, man God. Okay, and rabbis have a beautiful take on this. They go, wow, this is amazing. When is Moses a man and when is Moses God? Right? They'll say, well, he's man when he's making all of his mistakes, but when he's doing the miracles, well, he's God. Okay, isn't that really nice? But they blend the human and the divine together because they've always seen the partnership that heaven has with earth. Right? God loves to leave heaven and be with his creation on earth. And I want to live inside them, when he builds the tabernacle, is sort of this idea. So in rabbinical commentary, they find all these words, very obscure, of course, where they love to put God in the center of the story. Okay, so Judah, who's obviously eventually going to be a Messiah, is meeting Yosef, who's a type of savior, who's also later on going to be a Messiah, right? Eventually they're going to say Mashiach ben Yosef, the type of the suffering Messiah, the Messiah who suffers for everybody and brings on redemption through his suffering, as opposed to Mashiach ben David, who brings on who comes through the line of Judah, by the way, who ends up bringing on the redemption by his military might. And they'll put those into two different characters because they struggle with the idea of them being in one. Yet you're constantly getting in Jewish exegesis this merger of God and man together all the time, through partnership, through prayers, through dreams, just through Judah approaching a love, something, when it should have just said El. So they love to play on that kind of stuff. Now, so Joseph is going to eventually reveal himself, okay, to his brothers, and you get that interesting little story where Joseph asks his servants to leave the room, right? And everybody else has got to leave, and so you just get his brothers together, and then he reveals himself, and it's absolutely beautiful. Right? There's lots of crying. There's Joseph is very emotional in it throughout this whole event. He demonstrates a great love for his brothers. He's not holding things. He could easily have hurt them if he wanted to, but he doesn't. And Judah, really comes to the fore when Joseph plays a trick on his brothers and says, give me Benjamin, which is his biological brother, by the way, right? Out of all the brothers, that's his only biological brother. And Judah says, no, take me, right? The substitute. And obviously enough, who's going to be the Messiah is going to come through Judah. It's a very nice little play on there. But Joseph is discovering the intention of all of his siblings, and when he reveals himself, he does so without any presence of the Egyptians. Why does he do this? Okay, not 100% sure. The text doesn't say, so of course then you get lots of exegesis. And let's give you a Christian exegesis. Okay, there's a Christian piece of exegesis. It's very modern, okay, which says, and developed in Israel, and you can see why in a minute. So Joseph reveals himself to his brothers once all the Gentiles were out the room. Ergo, all the Christians should leave Israel, and then the Jews will believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Okay, and so you actually can get that theology presented to people. I've heard it, and I've heard it from Christians as well as from some Messianics. Not all Messianics, no. Very, very, it's a little number. But I would argue against that, because actually it goes against the whole being grafted in stuff. You're grafted in, except that you got to leave. Well, that makes no sense, okay? You're either in or you're out. And we're in, right? We are in. We are part of the people of God. We are part of the promises and the blessings and the prophets. That's what Paul is adamant to tell Gentiles, okay? Stop thinking of yourselves as second-class citizens. Stop boasting over the Jewish people. Remember who's supporting who here, but also you're part of the Commonwealth. So there's a lot of, he's going up and down depending on his, who he's talking to and his argument, but it's the same theology. The Gentiles were always part of the plan. Why is Joseph in Egypt in the first place? Now, you might say, his brothers sold him and it was all a complete mess. He turns around and says, no, God did it. God needed me to be here. I don't have any grudge against you guys. What you thought you were doing was bad. He's saving a whole bunch of Gentiles. Now, if God hates Gentiles, man, just let Egypt starve, right? No, why bother warning Pharaoh in the first place? Just look after this little group of Israelites. Everybody else dies off. We'll just take everything. I was like, fun. The Bible would have been a really short book if that had happened. But it's not. God chose, okay, before we even get the nation of Israel. We've only got a little group of people. But with this little group of people, man, I'm going to save the nations. Okay? And that's the story of Israel. This tiny group of people are going to be a light to the nations. They're not supposed to be like them. They have to have differences. So there's things they can't eat. There's days they can't work on. Got a special calendar that they need to follow. Okay, and it's going to keep themselves separate. There's going to be a Torah that applies to them. Okay, that's going to shine out. That's going to be so attractive. The nations are going to want to come. In this case, it's going to be food, but in the spiritual realm, it's going to be just the wisdom of the Torah. There's nothing else like it. right? The Torah speaks to every aspect of your life. It talks about how you deal with the land, how you care for the earth and crops and things, how you do your buildings, how you treat your slaves, how you do international politics, how you approach your God, how you do your worship, how you do your singing. I mean, who you marry, who you don't marry. I mean, it's got everything there. So an incredible piece of wisdom that speaks to every aspect of your life. And it's available to the nations. Like, it's not supposed to be hidden. When Israel leaves Egypt, who goes with them? The Egyptians. Right? There's something about Egypt that God has a little soft spot for. Okay. And he uses them to save the world at that time. And he uses Joseph to do it. Okay. And that family. So I'm not 100% sure that I buy. No, I'm going to say I'm not 100%. I don't buy the idea that we've got to get all the Gentiles out and then the Jews will finally miraculously realize who the Messiah is. Actually, it's uh, a lot of Jewish people approach Gentiles to hear about faith. Okay, right? Um, so we're meant to be together. We're always meant to be together. Okay, that needs to be there. Okay, so there's something about Judah now, because Judah now becomes like the patriarch. Okay, he has he leads the people to Goshen, not Reuben, not Simeon, not Levi, Judah. Okay, this is in Genesis. This is 46, 30, 28. Judah is the main character. He takes the people to Goshen. He's worked out which is the good land for their cattle rearing, and we can settle here because us as nomads will do well here, and they do, and they flourish. Okay, so he's quite wise. I mean, obviously he's got his issues. Okay, because obviously he had that problem with Tamar and things like that. And so there's a nice little clever midrash that now remember what's a midrash? Okay, story that's not true but tells the truth. It's got all these characters, and they've all got some issue. One person's blind, one person can't taste, one person can't see, one person can't hear, these kinds of things. But as this sage goes by each person who's afflicted with something, the person who's afflicted by a disease always tells him that actually I can do better than what you can. For example, the person who's blind, the rabbi comes over and says, isn't it bad being blind and you can't see the colors and the beautiful things of creation? And the guy says, Rabbi, I actually see better than you do. And the rabbi's like, what do you mean? Says, my sight is beyond your sight. And the deaf person says, I hear better than you do. There's when we think we have an infirmity, then sometimes actually it's more of a blessing than we think. Now, Judah had issues. He's son number 4. He makes a bunch of mistakes. Several of his kids are dead. Okay. But he learns, so much so that he becomes the spokesperson of the family. He approaches Joseph/God. He leads the people to the right location, and he becomes in the lineage of the Messiah. He becomes the lion. Never give up on anyone. Okay. Now that's what we're about Reuben and Levi and Simeon. Have we given up on them? Well, no, we haven't given up on them. It's just that they never seem to ever recover. Well, no, that's not true. Levi does. Simeon doesn't seem to recover. He's got all kinds of issues, wandering in the wilderness. Okay, it's actually the prince of Simeon who's having an affair with the princess of Midian that Pinchas stabs with the spear. Okay, Reuben is the guy that says, we don't actually want to go into the Holy Land. Can we have the territory in the Jordan? Right, and you end up with his territory not even being in the Holy Land. Okay, so he doesn't even want to come into the promise. So they don't. Levi is the only one who slash repents, but he gets on board with the messianic plan. He aligns with Moses when Moses says we're in trouble, we need to stop the golden calf sin. It's the Levites that say we're with you, okay, and they end up getting the priesthood. They end up getting the sanctuary cities. They end up becoming servants in the temple. Okay, and that's an incredible privilege if you think about it. And so Levi and Judah become quite very prominent figures in history, and they're in the lineage of Jesus, right? Because Mary is half Levite, and Joseph's all Judah, and so Jesus is a nice little blend of priest and king, which is, of course, he should be, but it's nice how that's played out later on. So the Torah portion gives us lots to think about, including how Jews and Gentiles relate. And then, of course, the first voice from the kings is from Solomon, the son of David, who's in the messianic line but isn't a shepherd, desires a heart that hears God and yet refuses to listen, and gets that initial story right off the bat. Be careful, Solomon, because things will get divided in two. Make sure you don't divide them in two. Keep them whole, and be with the person who actually is going to take care of them. Now, the kingdoms are split, which you see in our prophetic voice, but that's not where we're going to go to, because God's going to bring them back. Now, God himself has told Jacob, I'm going down with you into Egypt. Don't be afraid. Right? Who's in Egypt? God is in Egypt. Why is Egypt so important? God lived there. Right? Isn't that amazing? Okay, that's what it says. I'm going down with you to Egypt. So I'm coming out of Egypt with you. So there's certain parts of the planet that God has decided to reside in. Shiloh, Jerusalem, Egypt. Okay, now we all want to hop on a plane and go visit the pyramids. Okay, that has nothing to do with God, but no, they're there. But Egypt as a land is a beautiful, beautiful land. I'm sure it is. I've never been myself. The prophetic portion, Ezekiel. Okay, so Ezekiel 37. Now, of course, in context, you all know the context of it, right? 36 is the Israel's restoration. Then, of course, you get the dry bones, which is the beginning of 37. And then in 38, you've got Gog Magog. I mean, this is eschatological stuff. It's fantastic. The connotation is or the thing you've got going is everyone's in Egypt, whereas we're incubating our little nation. We come out of Egypt, everything's kind of going okay. Although, of course, the generation that sees all the miracles all dies in the desert. The nation eventually gets its rightful ruler, which is David, and then gets split after Solomon. Well, God doesn't like things split. He needs them to come back together. Okay, and that's going to be our portion. So Ezekiel 37, 15 to 28. One nation under one king, right? The way it's always meant to be. Of course, if you're someone like me, you think, you love headlines like this because I'm monarchist. I think monarchy is fantastic. Those of us who like to vote, make sure you vote for the good king. Yeah, okay. So the word of the Lord comes to me, Son of Man. Now, he's one of the only very few characters in the Hebrew Bible that is actually called Son of Man. Here, it literally just means human. Okay. In Hebrew, Ben Adam means just human. In Aramaic, which is the one you find in Daniel, because Daniel's in Aramaic, Bar Enosh is an eschatological character. So Son of Man has two nuances to it, depending on which language you're using. Okay, so the word of the Lord came to me, Son of Man. Take a stick of wood, and write on it, belonging to Judah and the Israelites associated with him. Okay? Then take another stick and write on it, belonging to Joseph, that is, to Ephraim. Okay, so Joseph and Ephraim are paired together, and all the Israelites that are belonging to him. Now, so we're talking about nations that are split, that are joining together. Join them together in one stick, so they'll become one in your hand. And this is in connection to the dry bones. Okay, that's your thing that's happened before. You can't separate it. And Gog Magog. Okay, this great war that comes. So there are a lot of people, and there's people here in this land calling themselves the Ephraimites, who run around and say, we're the stick of Ephraim, and we're sort of grafted in that way. I don't know why you have to go that route, because you're already grafted in anyway, right? You just were, right? God loves Gentiles. In case anybody didn't know, he's saving them with Joseph. For God so loved the world, he didn't need to make you into a stick, call you Ephraim, and not Gentiles, and as though you were some giant mistake. I'm terribly sorry I made a bunch of Gentiles. I really need everyone to become Jewish. Okay? We're grafted in. We don't need to identify ourselves as Ephraim, particularly when the text really doesn't, in context, has nothing to do with Gentiles. It's got everything to do with the ingathering of Israel. Okay, the dry bones, the war of Gog and Magog, which is got Gentiles in it, but they're all on the wrong side. So this is a exile, a futuristic exile that's coming back, which we're witnessing in our day today, in case anybody hasn't known. Now, there's people who long to look for signs. In fact, everybody's always looking for signs. Okay, Jesus challenges people. You're always looking for signs. By the way, I've been doing one miracle after another. You haven't seemed to pay any attention. And in 1 Corinthians 1, verse 22, if I'm not mistaken, because I had to look it up sometime today, it says, Jews are constantly looking for signs, but you don't need it. Because what is the sign? Well, first of all, the resurrected Messiah is a sign. The expansion of the church is a sign. Okay, the gospel has gone around the nations. And 2, Israel's a sign, right? That's a banner to the nations. The very fact that Israel has come back into the land is a sign. And if we ignore those and keep looking for other signs, which are there, okay, I'm not saying that miracles don't happen, they happen every day. You wait till the soldiers come home and tell us all kinds of great miracles, right? But don't ignore the miracles, the signs that are right there in front of your face. Because the United Nations sure is ignoring them. Okay, they don't care what the soldiers say when they come back from Gaza, and they don't care what Israel as a nation has done for them by telling them that God exists. When the people ask, this is in verse 10. 18. Won't you tell us what this means? Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am going to take the stick of Joseph, which is in Ephraim's hand, and all the Israelite tribes that are associated with him. So it's Israelites, okay? So we're talking about the Jewish people. And the stick that is in Judah's hand, and I'll make them into a single stick of wood, and they'll become one. And hold them before your eyes, the sticks that have written on them, and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will take the Israelites out of the nations, right? This is a prophetic calling from the return from exile, from where they have gone. I will gather them from all around, and I'll bring them back. And this is not the only prophecy that talks about the return, but it's a very strong one, a very clear one. And I will make them one nation in the land. Right? The land, the Israel and the land are inextricably linked. Israel is a people and Israel is a land. And those two groups are joined together. And just because of good Hebrew poetry, now, just so you all know, 80% of the Bible of Hebrew is in poetic language. It's the way it's written. It really helps with memory, etc., etc. And so it's I'm going to bring them back to in the land on the mountains of Israel. Okay, it's the very poetic to sort of say Israel and her mountains and her ranges. Those are, if we're still not clear that it's a physical land, you've just forgotten how to read all of a sudden. Okay, there'll be one king. Okay, we're back to the nation, the idea of monarchy again. Okay, not unknown in the time period, because when Israel was in the desert, they were told to set up a king. Israel has had monarchies before. At the time of writing in Ezekiel, monarchies existed. We live in a time period where monarchies are sort of like out of fashion, unless of course you're England, and then you use them to make lots and lots of money. Okay, you put the little faces on coffee cups and tea towels and things like that, and visit their castles, and it's great. But monarchy really they have a function. They really do have a responsibility. The Torah tells them what they're supposed to do. It's a limited function, and wouldn't it be nice if we actually had government that did that? But the prophetic voice is there's going to be one king. Now, of course, this produces all kinds of issues, because if we only have one king, why, not going to live forever, is he? Okay, so we get everybody back, we get a king, and he dies. Oops. Okay, there's this sort of idea of, well, hang on, how long can this king last for? And of course, there's a great midrash on this. Okay, so the Jewish sages will get together and they go, wow, how long is this one king going to live for? And they'll start going, well, of course, he lives one generation, he lives 40 years. No, 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 no. He's going to live for as long as Israel was in Egypt. He's going to live for 400 years. Okay, and no, 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 no. Look, he's one day is like 1,000. He's going to live he's going to live for 1,000 years, this guy. He's going to live an entire millennial Sabbath for us. Okay, so you get this idea that there's actually a millennial reign of a king. Oh, where do we hear that story before? Somewhere in the New Testament. Okay, this sort of idea of a millennial reign is picking up on a discussion. How long can our one king last for? Okay, and but there's this one king. He's going to be over everyone. He's going and they will never again be two nations. Right? Well, that's going to be a problem if our one king doesn't live very long, right? Okay, because once you get, our children don't seem to do as well as our parents. Okay, unfortunately, seems to be a story. It's not an uncommon story between Solomon and David, or sorry, Solomon and his kids. It's a common story all over the world, right? It really is. We are, as parents, we really are expected to bring up our children in the way of the Lord. We don't always manage to do that, unfortunately. Okay, they will no longer defile themselves between idols and the images and all of their offenses. So there's this idea of uncleanness and idolatry that God is going to, that Israel is no longer going to be partaking in. Remember, God doesn't like uncleanness, and he doesn't like idolatry. It should be no other gods. And so this new nation that's going to come back in exile is going to only have the one God. God says, for I'm going to save them from all of their sinful backsliding. Well, that's kind of nice. Okay? And I will cleanse them. What's not mentioned? How? Right? There's the prophet comes along and says these beautiful things. One, he doesn't tell you how he's going to bring it back. Two, he doesn't say where he's going to get this king from. Okay, you don't know how long he's going to last, and you've got no connection to where's the sin. How do you get rid of the sin? So there's lots of room to start gestating some theology. Okay, and so you've got generations of people working this out. Are we going to get rid of the sin because we're going to get rid of it? We're going to get rid of the sin because he's going to get rid of it. How's he going to get rid of it? Is he going to use sacrifices? Not mentioned there. Maybe sacrifices aren't important after all. What really is important? You run with it. And that's what rabbis do. Okay. And yes, you do end up with some people, including in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they record that God is going to come and make us clean, not because of of sacrifices, but because of his substitute. Okay, so this sort of it's a small stream. I'm not going to say it's mainstream. It is not. Okay, but it is one of the traditions that gestate over time. We're looking at a beautiful prophecy, incredibly mysterious, unbelievably unclear. Okay? Typical prophet. Okay, you wish that they could spell this out. You know, they will no longer defile themselves. Well, how? Don't say. Okay, and I'm going to save them from their offenses and their backsliding. Well, how are you going to do that? I'm gonna, and they'll be my people, and I'll be my God. I mean, the final line is your utopia. Okay, it's God with his people. God has always wanted a people. God can't be king without a people. Right? The whole idea of creation is a giant act of love. He didn't have to do it, but he did do it. He didn't have to redeem it, but he did redeem it. He didn't have to live in it, but he loves to live in it. There's something about this place. And we really have to have a high appreciation of creation as much as he does. And if we have a high appreciation of creation, we wouldn't have half the mess, okay, that we have right now. We would take care of the earth better than we do. We would take care of our brothers and sisters much, much better than we do. We'd have a much better system of government if we really appreciated and loved the creation like God did. Well, who's going to be this king? Gets a little clearer. My servant David will be king. That's a problem. He's dead. And the monarchy hasn't done so well, which is why we're in exile. Okay. Remember, the Davidic king only lasted 400 years. So what are we going to do? Well, now you begin to have the Davidic king begin to take on the messianic frame. Okay. He's something else now. And which is all connected to return from exile, etc., etc. They'll have one shepherd, back to the idea of kings being shepherds. And we had a king who wasn't a shepherd, didn't work out so well. But we're going to have a shepherd king, have a king who knows us. He's going to live like us. He's going to be us. Probably the reason why Jesus did his the way he did his incarnation was exactly the way it needed to be. Okay? That he was a builder. And what's he building? Everything. Why? Because he built everything. Right? I mean, what better profession could you get? Right? But he's going to also have the form of a shepherd. They will follow my laws. They'll be careful to keep my decrees. Because remember, this is the promise that God has given to Israel in the desert, to people in all of their dreams, including Daniel, including Solomon. You know, if you obey my laws, you're going to have a long life. And that shouldn't be rocket science, right? Here's another very true statement for you. Eat right, live longer, right? You do not need to be a doctor with a 7-year degree to know that. I once watched a doctor who was a medical professional give a testimony in the Supreme Court, no, or the Senate of Colorado. It just was on live TV, and he was there to just to demonstrate, medical opinion on how to help people have longer lives, and that was his statement: eat right, live longer. Guys, he said, we eat junk. This is the reason why we're all getting crazy diseases, and I'm having to, why type 2 diabetes is going through the roof because we're eating so much sugar. It's not rocket science. Okay, what's also not rocket science? Obey God. The rules that God gives are not harsh. They're not cruel. They're not evil. They're actually good. Even Paul says, the law is holy, just, and good. It can't possibly be bad. Okay, can you fulfill every bit of it? No, of course not. Can you obey the Torah? Yes, you can, just like Abraham did. There's that nice little mystery as to how that plays out. Okay, and they're going to be on this ancestors' land. They're going to have children, and their children's children will live there forever. That's a long time, by the way, which kind of goes interesting. Then what does it mean to live forever and actually get to the world to come? That's another theological discussion for the Jewish exegetes. Now, here's the thing that's really interesting, verse 26. And I need you to think very carefully, where have you heard this before? And I will make a covenant of peace with them. It'll be an everlasting covenant. Now, that is a very interesting sentence. Doesn't say, I'm going to make a new covenant. Could have, knows how to say those kinds of things. Jeremiah talks about a new covenant. But that's not what you get. You get the words, I'm going to make a covenant of peace. Where have you heard that before? Well, if you've got your Jewish hats on, then you leap back into the book of Numbers, where you have the sin of Simeon and the Midianite princess. And Pinchas comes along with a big spear and stabs the two together. And God says, wow, the zeal of this guy has stayed my hand. I will make a covenant of peace with him and his family forever. Okay, so there's this family of priests that have this covenant of peace with them. What is a covenant of peace? No idea. Okay, it's not clear from the text. But something exists where there was something wrong, some sort of violence occurred, which is also part of the solution, and then you end up with this time of peace. And God's saying the same thing here. Something's gone wrong, and you're going to come back together. Unfortunately, as we've discovered, it ended up being violent. There was probably a bit of there was a civil war or internal war, whatever you want to call it. And but then now there's going to be this covenant of peace. Okay, it's with Israel. This is a special covenant. It's not the Davidic covenant. It's not the Abrahamic covenant. There's lots of covenants in the Bible. This is another special one, the Brit Shalom, the covenant of peace. And is it conditional? Let's have a look. Okay, I'll establish with them, I'll increase their numbers, and I'll put my sanctuary in them forever. Whoa. Okay, doesn't say temple. Okay, dwelling. A very interesting thing for God to say. He could have said temple. It might have been the big messianic expectation there's going to be a temple. But of course, we know from other texts a bit later that the temple that is going to be made is eventually going to be corrupted. It's going to be something else. Okay, and so again, in Ezekiel's vision of a future temple, it looks very different to the temple that's described in the Torah. Right? There's some great studies that are done where they put the two side by side, and I recommend anyone to engage in those studies. They're fantastic. Okay, you discover that the court of the Gentiles not there, the court of the women's not there. Okay, you're looking at this temple where everyone's allowed to go to, right? And the inside's made of wood, not gold, where it's very humble. It's a humble building and a dwelling. And instead of having a chair and a parochet and a separation, it's got a chair in it. This fascinating study. Okay, I recommend anyone to have a look at Ezekiel's thought here. Here, he says, okay, I'm going to put my sanctuary in them. My dwelling will be with them. God has always wanted to live with his people. Okay, I'll be their God. They'll be my people. And the nations will know. There is no condition to this. Right? There's no, if you obey my commands, then you get this. He has said that before. But once he gets to the establishing this covenant of peace, there doesn't seem to be conditions laid out, right? Where you'll keep having peace and you keep living in the land if you do X. No, I'm bringing you back. The banner for the nations is coming. It's what Israel is. I'm going to put myself there somehow. Do not war against these people. You are going up against God. Okay, that's why the prayer for the soldiers is, Lord, may your enemies submit to our soldiers. They're not my enemies. They're your enemies. And woe is he who goes up against the living God. But they are a sign and a symbol for the people. So, a couple of very interesting Torah portions. and very interesting voices from the kings and the prophets. Okay, and so let's have a discussion, guys. What do you think? Unmute yourselves. Let's go and wrestle with the text.
We'll come and ask it. Come here. Yeah, ask it. Otherwise you might not get a chance.
Who's up?
Okay, I've got one.
Fantastic.
How does the New Testament passage, the road to Emmaus and the resurrection appearances, tie in?
How does it tie in the way God, well, so when does God bring back his people and when does he live in their land? So some people would argue that this is the return from Babylon, right? That they return from Babylon and God makes them clean, and then they rededicate the temple, thanks to the Maccabees and all that kind of stuff. And that's all done away with. But that misses the eternal aspect of these prophetic promises, right? There's no condition, and they're eternal. So they have a much more futuristic sense to them. So you still get people arguing both ways, both in the Jewish world and in the Christian world. Okay, but I think the more prevailing view is at the time of Jesus, this had not yet happened. So, and Jesus makes no reference to an ingathering, right? That's when he's standing or sitting around, he doesn't sort of tell his disciples, okay, well, let's all just wait for the tribes to come back. I'm the Messianic king. He's describing, this is the type of Messiah that I am, right? I'm the one who's preaching good news to the poor, and you're going to be taking the gospel to the nations. This other stuff, that's still to happen. So, yeah, it's mysterious, and as a Western Protestant, usually we rail against the idea of mystery. We need things to be solved, and I need to see the ladder, and I need to see A plus B equals C, and let's move along. Whereas in the Jewish world and in the Greek Orthodox world, or the Orthodox world, there's a much more of a deepest appreciation of mystery, where you look at these texts and you go, I don't quite understand them, but gee, they sound good. So I'm gonna believe it. And they sort of, and so if anybody has ever been to Orthodox services, their liturgies contain more mystery than our Western liturgies. They say things and you go, what is it? What do you mean by that? And they go, don't know, just believe it. I'm just quoting scripture, so and I'm cool with it. So which is interesting. But on the road to Emmaus, so this is after the resurrection, okay? And Jesus is with two of his disciples, and he starts sharing, and we get no dialogue. Right? It's one of those things where Luke and I are going to have a big discussion as to why he didn't include that. Says he opens up the scriptures. Thanks for telling me nothing.
Yeah.
So he opened up the scriptures. Are you okay with it? And if you were Greek Orthodox, you'd be like, yep, I'm good with it. So, but if you're someone like me, I gotta know.
Aaron, I've been eavesdropping. It's David here.
Okay.
I thoroughly enjoy your talks. I wanted to ask one very simple little question that's bothered me since I was a kid. In Genesis 37, is it the Ishmaelites or is it the Midianites who take Joseph off to Egypt?
Let's have a look. See,
Flip back.
Genesis 37.
Yeah.
They do it. They plays them both. Does it?
Yeah. The Ishmaelites go by and they say,
Then
"Oh,
they
well,
sell them to Midian.
yeah," and then the Midianites sell them into to Ishmaelites or something. It's kind of back and forth. The Midianites, you pull them out of the pit.
So there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, and then the Midianite traders passed them by, so the brothers pull him out, and they sell him, and they take them down. Yeah. So there's a okay. So if I did a subject at Hebrew University which studied a lot of these things. Unfortunately, it was studied. The professor who taught it, Professor Yair Zakovich, who was a fantastic professor, is not a believer. Doesn't believe in anything. He sees passages like this as there are competing traditions that are being recorded by the same text, okay, by the redactor, okay, and so and that's actually true in some cases where there's similar accounts, verbal stories of the same event. We know them as the Gospels, okay, where you have multiple verbal accounts and eyewitnesses that don't all have exactly the same details, and then they all get recorded, and then the skeptics come along and go, see, it's a load of rubbish, okay. Whereas a literal archaeologist says, oh, look, we've got a story of the brothers doing this, and then some traders take people to Egypt, and they're unsure, was it the Ishmaelites, was it the Midianites, but who's Midian? Midian is still a descendant of Abraham, so they're still family. So whether you're Ishmael or Midian, you're still brothers, but the Ishmaelites are a potential. So the text is recording of two versions at exactly the same time, without thinking it's a problem, and it's never corrected by a later redactor. Like, you never get to the time of Joshua and he goes, "Hey, I got a real problem with this," right? And then start getting the eraser out. One of my personal favorites is in Judges chapter 1, verse 8. They conquered Jerusalem. That it says they captured Jerusalem. Judges chapter 1, verse 8. You scratch your head and you go, really? When did they do that? They're supposed to be waiting until the time of King David. It's that they know they captured Jerusalem under King David, and then the same story appears in Samuel, and then it appears in Judges and no one has because of their appreciation of sacred history, they don't want to get their eraser out. Right? It's like us and John chapter 8. It's in some manuscripts, it's not in others.
Yeah.
The last couple of verses of Mark, it's in some manuscripts, it's not in others. So what do? No one has the heart to say, let's rub it out. And that thinking has already been in Hebrew Bible for thousands of years. So it's something that we get to wrestle with. It doesn't seem to have been a problem for either the translators of Greek or Aramaic or Jesus. Like, it doesn't seem to appear. Like, Jesus never talks to his disciples and says, as part of me being the Messiah, I'm going to fix up your history. Okay, you guys are real issues in your Bible here, chaps. That doesn't seem to be the thing. But literary archaeology seems to record variant traditions, and they are not sure whether they're Midianites or Ishmaelites, but they're family, because in either case, they're sons of Abraham. Does that help?
That helps a bit. I wondered whether
A bit, yeah, exactly. Wait till we get another story that where it doesn't seem to
I wonder
parallel.
whether the Midianites went by and Judah got an idea, and then the next little bit, the Midianites go by, and then it sells them to them, and they sell them to Egypt, and of course Ishmael and Egypt and all that sort of thing.
All
So,
that, yep,
yeah,
all there at exactly the same time.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Hmm.
Oh, Shabbat Shalom, by the way.
Hey, yes, Shavua Tov, everyone. A great week. I don't know about you guys, but we had a really good Shabbat here. It was nice and quiet.
You can say something.
Yeah. Yeah, Aaron, Stu here. Just a bit of a possible rabbit trail. We've been watching a chap named David Mitchell recently.
Okay.
He's been with One for Israel, teaching about Messiah ben Joseph and Messiah ben David. Very interesting discussion. Are you aware of him?
I'm not aware of him, but I was challenged by somebody who said, where does this Messiah ben Joseph, come from? Like, you guys are making it up. So I had to go down and I found it finally in, I think, a tractate Sukkah. I think it's 44a, where you have a long discussion, and they oscillate Messiah ben Joseph, and sometimes they put in brackets Messiah ben Ephraim, and what he's going to do, and how he's going to come, and how he's going to die, right? Because the discussions in, they're asking this question from Zechariah 12, who's the one that's pierced?
Yes.
And they go, is it the prophet? Is it the king? Is it this? And then someone says, no, it's Messiah ben Joseph.
Yes.
And they say, he's the one we're lamenting for. And our lamentations are going to bring Messiah ben David.
Right.
And you go, well, that's a very interesting little take. Okay, so that's the one of the earliest references I could find for that theology.
Right.
But it's definitely there.
Okay. I'll send you an email later today,
Okay.
giving some material on that.
Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Thank you. Good study this morning. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a goodly little portions.
I'm waiting till you get into Ezekiel 38.
Yes. Okay, because the Ezekiel 38 Gog Magog, it's gonna be his great big war, right? And then everyone's like, when's it going to be? Is it going to be before the millennium? After the millennium? It's going to be middle of the millennium, blah, blah, blah. You get to Revelation and it happens after the final rebellion.
Yep.
And you go, what? You have the millennial reign, and then it says, and then the war of Gog and Magog. And you go, wow, man, you really put that late there. So very interesting.
We'll find out.
Yep. And what's we've heard the expression geography is theology. Okay. So have a look at the geography around Nazareth. Okay, so this is where Jesus grows up. And so he grows up in the areas where Elijah and Elisha do their thing. Right. He grows up near the brook where Gideon's soldiers lapped. Yes. He grows up not too far from the Jezreel Valley of Gog and Magog. Right? He grows up in all of this theology. Right? So everywhere he walked was a biblical story to him. Right? And so it's why does God put his hero there? It starts to become a lot clearer when you sit on a mountain and you start going, oh, that's the village of Nain. Okay, that's where Elijah and Elisha do their prophetic callings and all their resurrections and their healings and their mysteries. That's where they fight battles. That's where they, there's all these things, and that's where Jesus lived. That's where he grew up. Because if you'd lived down in, Bethlehem, you think, well, he's got Amos. So, that's pretty much it. There's not a lot going on down here.
Okay.
Fascinating stuff.
Very. Thank you.
I was really interested from the beginning of the study when we talked about Egypt so much, and just sort of how, I don't know how that's going to play out. This is probably not connected at all, but they were the first modern nation to come and make peace with Israel, although, sort of in the sense of Israel's quite strong and we need
to do it.
do it.
Yes, and Solomon makes peace with them very early on in his career, right? The first thing he does is he makes peace with Egypt. Egypt gives their daughter to him, and Chronicles then says they even get cities. Okay, he gets Gezer and a few others where Egypt says, no, these are yours, right? And they create, and then they never go to war, right? That's it for their antagonism. You know, we have other enemies. They come now from the other side. In the last 2-3 weeks, the prominence of Egypt has been highlighted for me as well. I'm going, wow, man, God's really got a thing about this place. You know, out of Egypt I called my son. And Matthew's very emphatic that the Holy Family runs to Egypt. They have to go back and spend some time in Goshen. So, for Matthew's way of portraying the Messiah, that has to happen.
And I was just curious about, I always like to look at words like, what does Mitzrayim mean? And it you know, there's various, I haven't really studied it, but discussions, but it's sort of seen as a strong, one aspect is that it's a strong place. It's almost not quite indefensible, but it's, I mean, it is a very central place and in scripture but also
Breadbasket of the ancient world.
yeah, and so much has come out of it. It's, I mean, when you look at the effect of, you know, the things that have been culturally and also, but also in terms of knowledge and so on. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, they had technologies that we don't have anymore. Right? They can build these incredible buildings like the pyramids. No one knows how to build those anymore that way. You just can't, right? Other civilizations did build big buildings, this is true, but nothing on that scale. There's something, and that just Isaiah 19, just the prophetic future where God says, you know, Egypt, my people, right? Assyria, you're my handiwork, I've fashioned you, and Israel, you're my inheritance. But why would God call Egypt his people? Well, no, God, Israel's your people. The prophet does something. When he says something, he makes you think. You go, what are you talking about, Lord? What's so special about this place? And it says that here's a role. Israel's there. Yes, Israel's in the middle. It's a blessing to the nations, absolutely. But never forget where you started from. And there was a moment, a time where they were monotheistic. Right? There was a time, and I don't know the exact time periods, and I think people debate those time periods. I think there's a really healthy debate. I saw a video on it once, and I really liked it. Covered something about Exodus, obviously. But they were talking about when did the Exodus happen? When did the monotheistic kings arise? When did they fall? And when did they go back to paganism? Joseph might have had a very good influence on Egypt. Never known.
I was just interested also when we're talking about Joseph and his, you know, from your midrashes not showing honor to his father.
Yeah.
And this all comes before you get, you know, the commandments about honoring. So there's just sort of
they're rereading the story. Yeah. It's like they say Joseph's wife converted. It's like, well, to what? You know, we haven't actually invented Judaism yet. You know, like what exactly is she converting to?
I want to just share something very
Go for
briefly.
it.
As we look to Egypt nowadays, it plays a huge role in the Arab world because the church in Egypt is very strong.
It is.
And they are the sending missionary to all the Muslim world, to Algeria and other Saudi and the Gulf states. The educated Egyptians plays a huge role in the Gulf states and also sending missionary who know the language, know the culture. And they also, the churches say the vision of Isaiah 19, there is a lot of incredible number of believers in Egypt who've taken it very seriously. And of course, I lived in Jordan for nearly 30 years, and we have many of the people who played a huge role in Jordan as a pastors are Egyptians. And many of the people who come from Egypt to pray for the Isaiah 19 that come to Jordan, and of course, quite a part of the Isaiah 19 goes through Jordan. And they have like church in Egypt are totally aware of that, and they're totally involved in bringing visions of the church in Egypt to Isaiah 19. Of course, a lot of other missionaries or American or Canadian also join the vision of coming and pray in Jordan and Egypt for Isaiah 19. So that the church in Egypt really plays a huge role into
It does.
evangelism.
It's. I mean, unless we don't really know how big the Persian church is, but they're not very organized, not like the Egyptian church. The Egyptian Coptics, okay, are a third of Egypt.
Yes.
Okay? Right? That's the largest, right? And you, Falsi, you're right. They're intelligent, they're smart, they're educated, and they're missional. People sometimes think, oh, the Orthodox, the Coptic churches, these ancient churches, they don't do anything. No, they're doing their thing in their way. Largest church in the Middle East is the Cairo Garbage Dump Church, right? The Charismatic Coptics. I met some Coptics, Egyptian Coptics, in Warsaw when I was there for a Jews for Jesus event. Then I was giving a lecture, and 8 Coptics showed up. And I was like, what are you guys doing here? And they said, oh, we're here sharing the gospel. And it's like, well, and, I gave my little talk, and there were a few Polish people who argued with me, but all of the Egyptians stood up and said, no, we agree with this man. This man is correct. The Bible's Jewish. Jesus is Jewish. He's come and lived with us for a while. We gave him back, like the way that they had a choice. Okay, but you know how it is. And so they have a deep respect and response, and I think it's very healthy. I think it's a good one, and I think we as believers, we should all watch, what the Coptics are going to do, because they have survived under Islam for 1,500 years and flourished. So that's a good thing. So they have a very prophetic role to play, and it bears out a little bit, I think, in our Torah portion that we've seen this week. All righty. Well, guys, great. Okay. See you in a couple of weeks. Yes.
Yeah. Amen.
Great. Fantastic. Now, for those that want to pray and for Christchurch, we're about to do one of our largest outreach events tomorrow night. Now, we don't know how it's going to go because of the current situation. So we're very hopeful, of course. And so let's give it our best and continue shining the light. But regardless, the message of Christmas, whether you're celebrating it on the Western calendar or the Orthodox calendar, the message of Christmas is still the same. It's light, it's hope through the world in dark places. There's not one bad piece of this message that the world doesn't need. It needs it all. Don't be afraid to share your faith this season.
What does the large outreach involve? I mean, obviously Christmas Eve, but
so Jewish people are an intensely curious people. Okay, as a
Aaron,
race.
should we stop the recording?
Let's do that.